It was the spring of 1991 in Coldwater, Montana, a town known more for its open skies and cattle auctions than for secrets. But behind its peaceful facade, something sinister was already in motion. Emily Warren, 19, disappeared on a rainy Thursday night. No struggle, no screams, just a door left slightly ajar and a faint chemical smell in her room. Her roommate, Molly Drew, returned from a late shift at the diner to find Emily's coat still hanging and her wallet untouched. The only strange thing? A faint mist in the room, like someone had sprayed air freshener. But it didn't smell fresh. It smelled wrong. Emily didn't scream. She didn't resist. She was found 4 days later in an abandoned farmhouse just outside town. Her body told a haunting story. No bruises, no blood, just profound weakness, dehydration, and wide, terrified eyes. The autopsy confirmed what no one expected. She had been starved to death. The community reeled. The police, under Detective Marcus Doyle, called it a rare and cruel homicide, but not part of a pattern. Not yet. Then came Emily's diary, discovered a week after her burial, tucked inside a hollow floorboard by her friend Molly. The pages were damaged by dampness, but what remained sent chills through the local precinct. He wore black. He waited until I cried. Then he left again. Days went by. He only watched. He smiled when I begged. He never spoke. Marcus Doyle sat in his office long after midnight, staring at the words. A seasoned man with 23 years on the force, he'd seen drug busts, suicides, accidents. But this was different. It was intentional suffering. No fingerprints, no signs of struggle, just a perfect, controlled, slow death. He had no idea then. This was only the beginning. The town of Coldwater hadn't seen a murder in over 15 years. Not a real one, anyway. So when Detective Marcus Doyle stood over Emily Warren's body, he wasn't thinking of patterns. He was thinking of mistakes. One killer, one motive, one arrest. That was how things usually worked out here. Marcus was 45, sharp around the eyes, graying at the edges, married once, divorced long ago. His son Ethan had just turned 17, quiet kid, loved chess and staying indoors. Marcus always told himself he was protecting Ethan from the ugliness of the world. Maybe that's why he kept his work locked behind silence, compartmentalized. It made things cleaner. Or so he thought. At the precinct, the forensics report was thin. No fingerprints, no shoe impressions in the farmhouse. The only detail that stuck out was that strange chemical residue in the air, later identified as a fast-acting mild paralytic, possibly homemade, something to cause disorientation and tears. Marcus took it personally. Emily's father, a welder, had coached Ethan's baseball team once. Molly, the roommate, had babysat for his neighbor. This was his community, and someone had broken it. He followed the few leads he had, mostly dead ends. A former ex-boyfriend, dismissed. A drifter spotted a mile from the barn, had a rock-solid alibi. Days turned into weeks. The department's attention slowly shifted. Other cases piled up. People moved on. But Marcus didn't. He kept Emily's diary under lock in his desk drawer. Every night, he reread the same line. He waited until I cried. Why would someone want that? To wait for weakness? For tears? It wasn't about power. It was about control, patience, obsession. That's what made it terrifying. One morning, Marcus walked into the evidence locker and found Molly Drew there, pale, trembling, holding another envelope. She had found something else. "There's another girl," she whispered. Marcus's heart stopped cold. There was no pattern. Until now. The second name was Rachel Green. Molly found her name scribbled inside Emily's old sketchbook, hidden behind a glued back page. The ink was smeared but still legible. Next to the name, a date. July 13th, 1989. 2 years before Emily's death. Marcus Doyle flipped through the missing persons files. Rachel had vanished that summer while house-sitting her aunt's cottage outside town. No one had found a body. The case had gone cold. No leads, no suspects. But something in the details made Marcus freeze. Rachel had been reported missing 4 days after she stopped answering calls. When the police checked the house, the door was unlocked. Her suitcase was still there, her car untouched. And inside the living room, again, that same chemical smell. Marcus stared at the report like it had been written in fire. 2 girls, same setup, same eerily quiet disappearance, and both found or lost in isolated, forgotten spaces, places no one visited, places no one would hear you scream. He drove to Rachel's aunt's cottage that evening, just as dusk began bleeding into the sky. The building sat on the edge of Coldwater's pine border. Wind howled low across the empty field, making the shutters tremble. The air was heavy, not with weather, but with memory, with something wrong. Inside, the cottage was clean, too clean, like someone had scrubbed it of anything personal. But when Marcus checked the back room, he found scratches on the inside of the closet door, tiny, uneven, claw-like, and beneath a floorboard, something worse, a silver necklace engraved with RG. He didn't say a word on the drive back to the station, just stared ahead at the road as Coldwater's lights appeared in the distance like dying stars. This wasn't a copycat. It wasn't random. It was a system. 2 victims, same method, same eerie silence, same signs of waiting, like the killer wanted them to decay emotionally and physically before ending their lives. Marcus finally admitted it to himself. This wasn't over. It had just begun. Back at the station, Marcus Doyle pinned 2 photos side by side, Emily Warren and Rachel Green, both smiling, both gone, both stripped of the light that once filled their lives. He stood back and stared. Patterns were forming like veins in cracked glass. But the pressure was mounting too, and not just from inside his own head. The town council wanted closure. Parents were starting to whisper. Coldwater's quiet charm was souring into suspicion. He assigned 2 officers to cold call residents near both crime scenes. Maybe someone saw something, heard something. Most had nothing to offer, vague memories, irrelevant details, until one waitress from a truck stop on the edge of town said something odd. "I saw a guy in all black," she recalled. "Tall, wore gloves, didn't touch anything, just watched." Marcus circled her statement 3 times. It meant little on paper, but something in the way she said it got under his skin. Later that night, he returned to his office and opened Emily's diary again. One line leapt out at him. "He liked when I waited. He never spoke, just watched." The word "waited" echoed through his thoughts like a warning bell. This killer didn't just abduct. He observed. He had the patience to let fear do the work for him. And that patience wasn't random. It was deliberate. Ritualistic, even. At home, Marcus tried to relax with Ethan. But even in the silence of their small house, he couldn't shake the image. Someone, somewhere, just watching. Not to strike quickly, but to enjoy the stillness, the dread, the unraveling. Ethan sat at the kitchen table, sketching quietly. He glanced up once. "You okay, Dad?" Marcus nodded, forcing a smile. "Yeah, long day." But as he turned to pour his coffee, a single chill slid down his spine. He didn't know why. He just felt watched. The first real lead came from Emily's funeral. A distant cousin of hers, Carla Densmore, approached Marcus after the service, her eyes red, voice thin. "There was someone, a man. He used to watch Emily at the diner. Always sat in the corner. Didn't eat. Just stared. Marcus had heard variations of that before. Cold stares. Creeps. But this was different. Carla remembered his name. Thomas Rayner. Early 30s, lived just outside town. Odd reputation. Loner, kept to himself. No known job. It wasn't much, but Marcus needed something, and Rayner's name matched one small detail Emily had scribbled on the inside cover of her diary, almost as if unsure. T.R.? That was enough for Marcus to pay a visit. Rayner lived in a rundown trailer beside a lumber yard. Curtains closed, antennas bent, a moldy chair out front soaked in rain. When Marcus knocked, the man who opened the door was thin, pale, with dark circles under his eyes and fingers that twitched at the edges. "I don't know her," Rayner said before Marcus even asked. The inside of the trailer reeked of bleach, too clean. Marcus's instincts screamed. A search warrant followed days later. That's when they found the drawer. Inside were pages torn from newspapers, articles about Rachel Green's disappearance, and Emily's, and even a short clipping about a girl who vanished back in 1987 in another state. All underlined, circled. It was enough. Thomas Rayner was arrested and charged with Emily Warren's murder and suspected in Rachel's. The town exhaled. People started sleeping again. The chief shook Marcus's hand and told him he could finally breathe. But Marcus didn't. Something in Rayner's eyes had been off. Not guilty, not evil, just confused, like he was caught in someone else's storm. Later that week, Marcus closed his case folder and took his first deep breath in months. He didn't know he'd just walked away from the wrong man. By autumn of 1991, Coldwater had gone still again. Thomas Rayner's arrest gave the town exactly what it needed: a scapegoat. Headlines called him the silent killer, and though no confession ever came, the evidence, the articles, the proximity, the strange behavior, was enough to put him behind bars for life. Detective Marcus Doyle was officially commended, quietly celebrated, and reluctantly promoted. But the applause didn't last long. In truth, the town just wanted to forget. So did the department. But Marcus couldn't. Late at night, he'd sit on his back porch, watching the woods beyond his property line. Sometimes he thought he saw movement. Just for a second. A shape, maybe. A shadow. Then, nothing. He blamed the job, the pressure, the long hours. And yet, even after the case closed, one thing haunted him. Emily's last entry. The words were burned into his memory. He smiled when I cried. That wasn't Rayner. That wasn't in the man's nature. He hadn't smiled once in the interrogation room. He hadn't looked triumphant or cold. He'd looked lost. Marcus told himself it didn't matter. The case was closed. The town was safe. By winter, he retired. No speeches, no banquet, just a quiet departure and a cold drive home. He'd given 25 years to the badge. It was time. Now he lived in a small house just outside town with his son Ethan, who had started taking night classes at a nearby college. They shared late dinners, watched old detective films, joked about the cliches. Ethan always asked about his cases. Marcus never shared much. Some things are better buried, he'd say, but some things don't stay buried. 10 years later, in the summer of 2001, a girl named Sarah Collins was found in a cabin 2 towns away. Starved, paralyzed, eyes wide, mouth dry, wrists loose at her sides, as if she'd stopped resisting long before she died. Same method, same eerie stillness. But Marcus Doyle had retired, and the killer was just getting started. The cabin was nestled in the woods near Maple Hollow, an hour from Coldwater. Remote, dusty, a place locals only used for fishing weekends or cheating on their marriages. The perfect spot to disappear. Sarah Collins had been reported missing 5 days earlier by her landlord after she missed rent and hadn't returned any calls. She was 28, lived alone, worked at a bookstore, suffered from depression. Nothing unusual. Until they found her body. Inside the cabin, there were no signs of forced entry, no broken locks, no blood, no bruises. Just Sarah, thin, still, and cold. Her arms lay by her sides as if gently placed there. Her skin was dry, dehydrated, her cheeks sunken. She had died slowly and quietly. The only thing out of place was the air. It smelled faintly of ammonia and something else. Faint, chemical, familiar. The investigation was assigned to the National Violent Crimes Division as a precaution. Unusual method, unclear motive, no sexual assault, no ransom, no note. Agent Claire Monroe arrived 2 days later. Sharp-eyed, mid-30s, always carried a notebook, never a tablet. Trusted her instincts more than data. She stood in that cabin for nearly an hour without speaking, just tracing the room with her eyes. He watched her, she finally said. He waited. Her partner, Agent Daniel Holt, reviewed the forensics report. No fingerprints, no fibers, no DNA. But the marks were there. Emotional decay, starvation timeline, sedative traces. Claire checked the federal database. Nothing matched. Then she looked further, back 10 years. And there it was, the Emily Warren case. Same symptoms, same decay, same chemical fog, same strange phrasing in the notes. She printed the file, dropped it on Holt's desk. Either someone's copying a forgotten case, or the original killer was never caught. In the cold, fluorescent glow of the agency's office, the ROM went still. Claire looked at the old file again. Who was the lead on this back then? Holt squinted at the name. Marcus Doyle, retired, Coldwater PD. Claire tapped her pen on the desk. Let's pay him a visit. It had been years since Marcus Doyle heard a knock after sundown. He lived on the edge of Coldwater now, a modest home surrounded by pine and silence. His days were filled with gardening, old books, and the occasional visit from his son, Ethan, now 27, and working it out of town. Marcus still rose early, still made coffee like he was heading to the precinct, but his badge stayed locked away in a drawer alongside a fading photo of Emily Warren. That night, the knock was firm, not friendly, not urgent, federal. He opened the door to two unfamiliar faces. Detective Doyle? The woman asked. Retired, he replied. And you are? Agent Claire Monroe, Violent Crimes Division. This is Agent Holt. Marcus looked at the badges, then stepped aside. Inside, Claire wasted no time. She dropped a thin manila folder onto his kitchen table and flipped it open. Sarah Collins, deceased. Marcus barely glanced before his stomach turned. The photos, the layout, the skin tone, the eyes. He didn't need a report. He had seen that death before. Claire leaned forward. You investigated a case like this. A girl named Emily Warren, another named Rachel Green. Similar deaths, same method, no real conclusion. We arrested a man, Marcus replied carefully. Did you believe he was guilty? He hesitated. Then, quietly, no, not really. Claire's eyes narrowed, sharp and clinical. Then we're dealing with the same person. And he started again. Marcus sat back, hands folding instinctively. The room felt smaller now. It's been 10 years, and whoever it is, Waited exactly that long. Marcus stood, walked to the cabinet, poured himself a drink, something he hadn't done in years. The glass shook in his hand. Why now? Claire didn't answer immediately. We think the new victim, Sarah Collins, was seeing a therapist. We're checking records. We'll find out more. But we needed to know where your trail ended, and if you'd help reopen it. He stared out the window. The woods outside were silent. The past, it seemed, was finally coming home. Sarah Collins had been seeing a therapist for nearly 7 months before her death. That was one of the first things Claire Monroe confirmed after cross-referencing medical records and insurance data. Sarah had suffered from depression, worsened after a bitter divorce the previous year. But her case notes were sealed under a confidentiality clause. Until Claire found the name. Dr. Leonard Graves, licensed psychologist, practicing just outside Maple Hollow. Private, respected, known for treating patients with trauma-related disorders. His online reviews called him quiet but compassionate. No red flags. Marcus sat beside Claire as she reviewed the file. He recognized the name instantly. Graves, his sister. Wasn't she the girl who died in '86? Anna Reed's? Claire nodded. Stabbed in her home. Fiancé was a suspect. Nothing stuck. Marcus leaned back, rubbing his temples. The weight of everything was pressing in. 2 victims, both tied to the same therapist's orbit. First, his sister's unsolved murder, now one of his patients, killed using a method that hadn't appeared in a decade. Claire wasn't the type to speculate too soon, but the connection was undeniable. They visited Dr. Graves the next morning. He lived in a tall, narrow house tucked behind a row of overgrown hedges. Ivy crawled up the bricks like veins. His waiting room was cold, colorless, not the comforting space one might expect. Graves himself was tall, lean, with deep-set eyes that seemed to blink slower than most people's. He spoke softly, choosing each word like a scalpel. Yes, Sarah was a patient. She had difficulty trusting people, but she never mentioned fear, not of anyone specific. Did she ever talk about someone watching her? Claire asked. Graves paused. Too long. No, not directly. She did say she felt seen, judged, like someone was waiting for her to collapse. Marcus and Claire exchanged a glance. Do you mind if we ask about your sister? Marcus said, breaking the tension. Graves stiffened, eyes narrowing. That was a long time ago, Detective, and I wasn't the one who needed therapy. Outside, the air felt heavier. Something was coiling just beneath the surface. Claire Monroe didn't believe in coincidence. Back at the agency's mobile office, she and Marcus sat in silence, staring at a pinboard littered with photos, red string, timelines. 2 hours into the night, the pattern was beginning to emerge, but not clearly, like fog shifting just enough to tease a shape you still couldn't name. Rachel Green, Emily Warren, Sarah Collins, and now, Dr. Leonard Graves with 2 violent deaths orbiting his life. It was Agent Holt who first said it aloud. What if this isn't about the victims? Marcus raised an eyebrow. Go on. What if it's about grief, about those left behind? Graves loses a sister. Sarah gets a divorce, emotional collapse, vulnerability. Claire tapped her pen. And someone waits for that, feeds off of it, chooses victims when they're emotionally fractured. Marcus thought of Emily's diary again. The line was burned into his memory now. He smiled when I cried. It wasn't violence that satisfied him. It was watching people deteriorate. Claire made a decision. We need to dig through Graves's entire client history, especially female patients. Anyone who suddenly dropped off after a few months, anyone who didn't return calls. That led them to an alarming trend. Over a span of 6 years, between 1989 and 1995, 4 women had been treated by Dr. Graves and then discontinued therapy due to relocation. 3 had no further medical records. 1 had died in a hiking accident with no witness, and 1 was listed as missing for 6 months, then quietly removed from the database. Claire circled the name. Lillian Moore. Last seen, Coldwater County, 1993. Marcus's face drained. No one reported her? Graves wrote she had no family, said she moved out of state. No one verified that? Not in 1993. Everything was paper. Claire stood slowly. We need to talk to Graves again, this time off the record. But Marcus wasn't looking at the board anymore. He was staring at a photo of Emily Warren, and in her eyes he saw it now. Not fear. Resignation. Dr. Leonard Graves opened the door the second time with slower hands, less warmth. He knew why they were back. Claire Monroe didn't waste time with pleasantries. We've found 4 women from your patient list between 1989 and 1995. All terminated therapy. All vanished. Graves didn't flinch, but he didn't answer either. Marcus Doyle, standing at the edge of the porch, watched his eyes carefully. Graves blinked, then turned. I'd prefer not to discuss patient records without proper warrants. Claire stepped forward, tone even but firm. This isn't about ethics anymore. It's about dead women. Still nothing. But something flickered. The tiniest twitch in the corner of Graves's mouth. Not a smile. Not quite. More like the memory of one. Graves closed the door on them. Back in the car, Claire scribbled into her notebook. He's hiding something, but I don't think he's the killer. Marcus looked up sharply. What? He's too outside it, emotionally insulated. If he was the one doing it, he wouldn't be this measured. He'd be performative, confident. Marcus nodded slowly. Then who? Claire glanced toward the house one more time. Someone close. Close enough to know the timing of the trauma. Maybe someone who shared that grief. Back at HQ, Agent Holt was already pulling new files. Medical billing logs, office visitor records, even camera footage from the pharmacy across the street from Graves's practice. That's when something strange appeared. A tall man, long coat, wore a mask even before the pandemic. Black gloves, came every week, always watched the front window, never entered. Facial recognition, no match. Claire stared at the footage, then played it again, and again. He wasn't stalking Graves. She zoomed in on a brief reflection in the glass. He was watching the patients. Marcus leaned closer. The timestamp on the video? 2 weeks before Sarah Collins went missing. This wasn't random. This was hunting. The man in the footage had no name, no record, no known address. Just a shadow that showed up every Thursday at 4:15 p.m., right when Sarah Collins's sessions ended. He never went in. He never spoke to anyone. He just stood across the street, hands in his coat pockets, face hidden under a black surgical mask and low hat, watching the windows of Dr. Graves's office. The agency ran the video through enhancement tools, frame by frame. They picked up a limp in his left leg. Maybe old injury, maybe for effect. But there was something else, a detail so small it would have been missed if Marcus Doyle hadn't caught it. Go back 2 seconds, Marcus said. Holt rewound the feed. There, a book in the man's hand. Not a phone. Not a weapon. Emily Warren's favorite book, The Pale Mare, a first edition. Only 5,000 were ever printed. Marcus recognized the cover instantly. That book was buried with her. Claire blinked. You sure? I put it in the casket myself. I remember. I didn't even tell anyone. The room went silent. If someone had the same book, or that exact copy, it meant one thing. Someone had been there. Someone had touched the body, the coffin, maybe before it was buried. Claire leaned forward, voice low. That man's not just watching. He's revisiting. A new theory was forming now, sick and twisted. The killer was connected to the victims not by profession or blood, but by grief. He saw them at their lowest, when they cried in therapy, when they left broken, when they had nowhere else to go, and he waited until they were perfectly weak. He doesn't kill them for pleasure, Marcus muttered. He kills them to finish something, to freeze them in their pain, like preserving a moment. That's when Holt entered with a new file. We tracked the car parked near the pharmacy those days, registered to someone who used to live in Coldwater, moved out in 1994. Claire opened the name. Her blood ran cold. Ethan Doyle. The name on the file hit Marcus Doyle like a punch to the chest. Ethan Doyle, his son, his quiet, observant, chess-playing, never quite fitted-in son. Claire glanced at Marcus immediately, not with suspicion, with calculation. We can keep this internal for now, but you need to be honest with me. What do you know? Marcus sat back, his mouth dry. He's been distant. Always was, since he was a kid, lost in his head. But he's not violent. Claire opened the traffic camera photos from outside the pharmacy. Frame after frame showed the same man, long coat, surgical mask, dark hat, standing just far enough from the entrance to seem irrelevant. And now they had the plates. Registered to a P.O. box in Chicago, billed under Ethan's name. Claire's voice was low but sharp. Why would your son be watching Graves's office every week? Marcus didn't answer. He couldn't. His mind was already spiraling through memories. Ethan asking about the Emily Warren case, always watching the news coverage, growing quiet when Marcus would come home late. He remembered something else, the silver necklace they found at Rachel Green's scene. It had gone missing from the evidence locker 2 weeks after the arrest. Only 3 people had access, and Marcus hadn't noticed the chain around Ethan's rearview mirror until now. He thought it was just something from a girlfriend, a souvenir, nothing more. But now, Claire closed the file slowly. We can't move yet, not until we're sure. But if it's him... Marcus stood, too fast. The chair scraped hard against the floor. No, you don't understand. I raised him. I'd know. Claire's voice softened, just slightly. Sometimes we only see what we want to. Marcus didn't respond. His hands trembled slightly as he pulled out a file, Emily's diary, old and worn. He read the last entry one more time. He never spoke, but when I cry, Ed, I could feel it, like he was proud. Outside, thunder rolled low. Something was coming. Something that had Marcus Doyle's name written all over it. That night, Marcus drove. No badge, no warrant, no permission. Just rage, confusion, and fear swirling under his skin like oil in water. Ethan lived in a studio apartment on the edge of Springfield, 3 hours east of Coldwater. He hadn't visited in months, not since Marcus's birthday, when Ethan brought him a chess set carved from obsidian and bone. He remembered the weight of the pieces, the smoothness, the knight's eye scratched in with unnatural care. Marcus arrived at midnight. The building was quiet. An old Victorian converted into 6 units. He climbed the creaky stairs to the 2nd floor, hesitated, then knocked once. No answer. He knocked again. The door opened slowly, unlocked. Inside, the apartment was dim, lit only by the glow of a desk lamp. On the walls, nothing. Not a single photo, not a single frame. Just shadows. On the table, books. Hundreds of them. Stacked, sorted, categorized by emotion. Grief, obsession, abandonment. Marcus ran his hand along the spines, recognizing titles he'd seen in Emily Warren's diary, in Rachel Green's abandoned room. And then he saw the journal. Handmade, black leather, no label. He opened it. The waiting is the art. Their weakness becomes mine. Their begging is music. Dad doesn't see me, but they do. His throat closed. It was Ethan's handwriting. Pages and pages of cold, clinical notes. Descriptions of emotions, cries, starvation curves. How many days each victim lasted. How long it took before the hallucinations. Which moments gave him the feeling. The cry before the collapse is the purest sound. Marcus stepped back, his breath hitching. He turned to the desk. Sitting beside the lamp, a box. Inside it, trophies. Emily's hair ribbon, Sarah's wedding ring, a page torn from Rachel's diary, the ink soaked with her final tears, and one more thing, a photo of Marcus from 10 years hours, ago, unaware, drinking coffee on the porch. Behind him in the photo, a faint shadow, watching. Ethan. Marcus dropped the photo. He didn't know it, but behind him, the door was slowly creaking closed. The click of the door behind him was soft, almost apologetic. Marcus turned slowly. Ethan stood in the shadows, half lit by the dying glow of the desk lamp. He wasn't startled, wasn't angry, just calm. In his hand was a small glass vial, pale yellow liquid sloshing gently inside. Marcus had seen it in every crime scene report, the paralytic, the first act in the play. "Dad," Ethan said, almost gently, "you shouldn't have come here." Marcus's voice cracked, dry and low. "Ethan, what the hell is this?" His son didn't answer, just walked past him, slowly, and sat at the desk. His fingers brushed the black journal, like a pianist touching keys. "You never saw me," Ethan whispered. "Not really. Always the job. Always someone else crying in your office. I just wanted to be noticed." Marcus's hands balled into fists. "So you killed them?" Ethan looked up, and for the first time, Marcus saw something alien in his son's eyes. Not rage, not madness, but joy. "No, I saved them. I gave them what you never gave me." He opened the journal and turned to a page with a careful, deliberate motion. Emily lasted the longest, 7 days. She was strong, even when she broke. She reminded me of Mom, I think. Marcus took a step forward. "You're sick. You need help." Ethan smiled, wide, slow, chilling. "I'm perfect. You just never looked hard enough." On the wall behind the desk, Marcus noticed something he hadn't before. A map. Red pins marking each victim's location. Strings connecting names. But in the center, a single black pin. Cold water. His own home. "You were planning something else," Marcus whispered. Ethan nodded, almost proudly. "One more. Full circle. But you got here early." He held up the vial as if offering a toast. Marcus lunged. The desk tipped. The lamp crashed. Glass shattered. But Ethan was gone, vanished out the back, through the fire. Escape, into the midnight air. Marcus stood alone in the wreckage, breath heaving, hands shaking. He wasn't just chasing a killer anymore. He was chasing his own blood. Marcus Doyle drove into the night like a man possessed. His hands gripped the wheel too tight. His heartbeat filled his ears. He could still feel Ethan's presence in that room, the quiet calculation, the twisted calm. Not anger, not desperation, control. It was always about control. He called Claire from the road. She answered on the first ring. "He's real. It's Ethan," Marcus said flatly. He ran. Silence. Then, where would he go? Marcus stared through the windshield, eyes hollow. Home. Somewhere familiar. Somewhere I taught him to hide. By morning, they had a full manhunt order out. Local units were alerted. Photos, details, height, build. Emotionally unstable. Approach with caution. Claire and Holt met Marcus back in Coldwater. The look she gave him wasn't pity. It was war-weathered sympathy. She didn't say I told you so. She didn't need to. They set up a temporary command post in the old Coldwater precinct. Dusty, quiet, like a forgotten tomb. Marcus stood at the board, looking at Ethan's photo. It was taken when he was 14. His face hadn't changed much. But the eyes, now they were different, dead calm. Agent Holt swept in with new intel. We pinged his phone 3 hours ago off a rural tower, South Woods, near the old water treatment plant. Marcus looked up sharply. He'd taken Ethan there once, when he was 9, just to kill time. The place was abandoned, rusting, overgrown. A perfect hideout. He's drawing us in, Marcus muttered. Claire nodded. Which means he knows we're watching. And he's watching back. They prepped quickly. Tactical gear, flashlights, radios. Marcus refused to stay behind. No one argued. As they drove out, clouds rolled over the sky, heavy and bruised. Rain threatened to fall. The road turned to gravel, then to dirt, then to nothing. Ahead, barely visible through the trees, a crumbling structure of steel and shadow. The old plant. Claire cut the engine. The team moved in silence. But inside Marcus? A storm was already screaming. The old water treatment plant loomed like a grave. Its walls were rusted iron and broken glass, choked with vines and ash-colored moss. The windows were jagged eyes. The main door, half open, groaned as the team entered, Marcus in the lead, flanked by Claire and Holt. Inside, the air was thick. Not just with mildew or rot, but with something else. Anticipation. The silence wasn't natural. It was designed, held, like the whole building was holding its breath. Marcus gripped his flashlight tight. Its beam cut across rusted pipes, shattered railings, and a hollow stairwell that spiraled downward like a throat. Every step echoed. Every sound felt too loud. They found the first room easily. It had been cleaned. A mattress on the floor, shackles bolted into old plumbing, a camera on a tripod, lens cracked but still aimed at the center of the room. Duct tape, empty vials. One open book. The Art of Suffering, bookmarked halfway. Claire's voice was barely above a whisper. He's been here. Marcus moved to the wall. Etched into the paint were names. Emily, Rachel, Sarah, Lillian, and under them, Ethan, Dad. Claire caught it first. He's escalating. He's inviting me in, Marcus said, hollow. Suddenly, a noise. Footsteps, not far, controlled, intentional. Claire and Holt raised their weapons. Marcus moved instinctively toward the stairwell, heart in his throat. From below, a voice. Calm, crisp, close. You finally showed up, Dad. Marcus froze. Ethan's voice echoed upward, not angry, not even excited, just ready. It's taken you this long to see me, to really see me. I thought I'd have to make more noise. Claire mouthed, hold position. But Marcus didn't. He stepped to the top of the stairs and called down. Ethan, it's over. Whatever this is, you can stop. A pause, then a laugh. Not cruel, not wild, just sad. You think I haven't already 80? A low hum kicked on. Somewhere below, a generator or something older. And then screaming. Not from Ethan. From somewhere deeper. Alive. The scream wasn't long, just enough to shatter the stale air. Marcus was already moving. Down the stairwell, past the rust-stained pipes and shattered tiles, the light from his flashlight jittering across wet cement and coiled hoses. Claire and Holt followed close behind, weapons drawn, footsteps soft. The stairs opened into a lower chamber, vast and low-ceilinged, once used for filtration. Now it was a nest. At the far end, beneath a flickering industrial light, sat a cage. Inside, a woman, alive, barely. She was maybe mid-20s, skin pale, cheeks sunken, wrists bruised from restraints that had recently been cut. Her eyes snapped to Marcus as he approached, wide and glistening, a raw gasp catching in her throat like she didn't believe he was real. He dropped to one knee. "You're safe. You're safe now. I'm Marcus Doyle." Her lips quivered. "He said you'd come." Claire and Holt worked quickly to cut the cage lock. Holt radioed for emergency response, medics, backup, everything. Claire scanned the room. He planned this. He left her as a message. On the wall above the cage, written in smudged charcoal, a sentence, "Now you know what it's like to wait." Marcus turned to the girl. "What's your name?" "Ava. Ava Linley." "How long have you been here?" She blinked slowly. 5 days? Maybe 6. I don't remember. He didn't talk much. He just watched. Claire glanced at Marcus. He's following his old rhythm. She had maybe one more day. Then Ava said something that froze the room. "He talked about you. Said you used to fall asleep at your desk. Said your coffee always smelled like cinnamon." Marcus's breath hitched. That detail. It was private, personal. Something only someone who'd spent a childhood sitting quietly in the corner of a precinct office would know. He said when you finally looked at him, it would be too late. A scream of "me," Tal echoed from above. A door slamming, fast footsteps. He was still in the building. Claire barked, "Go, go! Don't let him vanish again!" Marcus was already running, chasing his son through the catacombs of memory and murder. The air shifted, sharp, metallic, alive with urgency. Marcus tore through the corridor, boots slamming against wet cement. Every door that slammed above echoed like a heartbeat. Ethan's heartbeat, racing, retreating, daring. Claire was just behind, shouting directions into her radio. "East access stairwell. He's headed toward the upper maintenance floor." The plant was a maze, a tangle of narrow catwalks, hanging chains, rusted ladders. Rain had begun to seep through the shattered ceiling, and every surface shimmered like slick bone. Marcus reached a rusted stairwell and grabbed the railing, nearly slipped, pulled himself up. At the top, movement. Ethan, half glimpsed in the strobing light of a broken exit sign. Long coat trailing, face still masked. He looked back, met Marcus's eyes for half a second, and ran. "Ethan," Marcus bellowed, voice hoarse. "Stop! Don't make me do this!" No response, just footfalls, hard, determined. They burst through a side door and onto the upper catwalk, suspended above the old processing vats, vast concrete basins half filled with black rainwater and algae. A fall would kill a man. Ethan slowed near the edge. Stopped, turned. Marcus raised his hands, palms out, gasping for breath. "It doesn't have to end like this." Ethan's voice was calm, almost amused beneath the rain. "Of course it does. It always did." Claire arrived seconds later, weapon raised. Holt flanked from the far side, boxing Ethan in. But he didn't move. "I gave them peace," Ethan said. "I gave them silence. Not like you. You gave noise, deadlines, cases, absence." Marcus stepped forward, trembling. "You think this makes you more than me? You're not seen because you hurt people. You're seen because they suffer. That's not legacy. That's rot." Ethan's smile under the mask was slow, sad. Still talking like a cop. He reached into his coat, but not for a weapon. A switch. He clicked it. A loud buzz roared beneath them. Claire screamed, "Get back!" A pipe exploded in the level below. Fire burst from the open valves. The catwalk shook. Ethan turned and jumped. The scream of twisted metal was swallowed by the explosion. Marcus lunged forward, but Holt pulled him back just as the catwalk buckled inward, collapsing into a choking plume of smoke, sparks, and shattered rust. Below, fire licked the edges of the broken vats. Steam hissed through ruptured pipes. The air turned chemical, bitter and white, as emergency sprinklers kicked in too late, misting everything in a ghostly sheen. "Ethan!" Marcus roared into the smoke. No answer. Claire and Holt moved fast, guiding Marcus away from the crumbling walkway as backup swarmed the plant. Medics rushed to pull Ava Linley to safety. A bomb squad swept in, searching for more triggers. It was chaos, choreographed and tragic. An hour later, a team located a body half submerged in the lower vat. Tall, male, black coat, face burned, mask melted into his skin. Too damaged for visual ID. A field agent approached Marcus quietly. "We believe it's him. No other exits, no footprints, no movement since the blast." Claire didn't speak. Marcus stood over the sheet-draped body, his jaw clenched so tight it trembled. He wanted to rip the mask away, wanted to see his son's face one last time, wanted it to not be real. But deep down, he already knew. "Bag it," he said. "Get a dental match." They did. 2 days later, confirmation came through. Ethan Doyle, deceased. Claire waited before bringing Marcus the file. She found him sitting in his backyard, near the overgrown garden, staring into nothing. "It's done," she said softly. Marcus didn't respond for a long time. Then, "He was right in front of me, all those years, and I never saw it." Claire sat beside him. "We don't see what we're afraid of, especially not in our children. I thought I was saving people." "You were. You did." He looked down at his hands. Hands that had held a baby once. Hands that signed arrest warrant. Hands that had never once asked his son if he was okay. "I gave the world my justice," he whispered. "But I never gave him my time." And now it was too late. 2 weeks had passed. Coldwater County had begun to breathe again, or at least it pretended to. News outlets declared the case closed. The phantom mourner, as the media had branded Ethan Doyle, was dead. Tributes flooded in for Marcus Doyle, the retired detective who had unknowingly chased his own son into the dark. But Marcus didn't feel like a hero. He barely felt human. He avoided the press, ignored the calls, sat in silence as boxes of evidence were delivered to the agency for archiving. Journals, photos, pieces of Ethan's twisted rituals now labeled, catalogued, sealed. The only thing Marcus kept was the chess set. It sat untouched in his study, the obsidian and bone glinting faintly in the light from the window. The pieces were still arranged as Ethan had left them, mid-game. Marcus stared at it for hours, days. Every piece was a moment. The Queen, Emily Warren. The Knight, Rachel Green. The pawn standing just 1 square from the end, Ava Linley, the one who lived. Claire visited him on a Thursday. She brought coffee, cinnamon, like always. She didn't say much at first, just sat beside him on the porch while cicadas buzzed in the tall grass. "You know what he told Ava?" she finally said. "He said, 'This is how my father teaches people. Through pain, through fear.'" Marcus winced. "He thought I made him this way." "He made his choices," Claire said. "You didn't kill those people. He did." Marcus looked out at the horizon. Flat, endless. "But I left him alone long enough to become someone who could." Claire didn't respond. She didn't need to. Because in his bones, Marcus knew she was right. And wrong. Parenting wasn't a script. It was 1,000 choices in silence, 1,000 missed questions, 1,000 hugs never given because you assumed they weren't needed. He'd saved 100 strangers, but not the one person who had begged in silence. And that would never leave him. They held the funeral on a gray Monday. No reporters, no official eulogy, no folded flags or 21 gun salutes. Just a simple pine coffin, a closed lid, and a father who stood alone at the edge of the grave. Ethan Doyle was being buried without honors. The agency made sure the location remained private. The death certificate listed no cause beyond accidental trauma due to structural collapse. There would be no headlines, no documentaries, no fame. Because monsters, Claire had said, don't get statues. They get dirt. Marcus stood in silence, hands in his coat pockets, the wind cutting through him like guilt. A few rows behind him stood Claire, Holt, and Ava Linley, still pale, still healing, but alive, really alive. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. She had survived the boy Marcus hadn't saved. The priest spoke in vague terms. No name, no past, just scripture floating over wet grass. Marcus didn't cry. He wanted to, but he couldn't. Because part of him wasn't mourning a son. He was mourning a stranger he had raised under his own roof. After the last clump of earth struck the coffin, Claire approached. "You don't have to carry this alone." Marcus shook his head. "I don't know how to carry anything else anymore." She looked down at the grave. "He fooled all of us." Marcus looked up at the clouds. "But he didn't want to fool me. He wanted me to see. He wanted me to know what he became, and to feel it." A beat of silence passed. Then Claire handed him a folder. "There's one more piece." Inside, a letter, found tucked behind a broken pipe in the plant, written in Ethan's handwriting. The last words? "Maybe now, when they cry, you'll finally hear it." Marcus folded the letter carefully and slid it back into the folder. "I hear it every day." And he turned, walking away from the grave, not toward peace, but toward penance. Marcus didn't go back to work. The agency offered him a consultancy position, desk work, no field hours. Claire even pulled strings to get him a quiet office near Coldwater, away from headlines. But he refused. He stayed home. For the first time in his life, he didn't want to solve anything. He just wanted to look backward, into a past he had ignored for too long. One afternoon, he entered Ethan's old room. It hadn't changed much, not really. The bed still made, the shelves lined with science fiction novels, chess trophies, dusty notebooks. The same cracked nightlight Ethan had used since age 6. The air smelled like silence, old wood, forgotten breath. Marcus stood in the center of the room, uncertain. Then he started opening drawers. Inside one, a folded piece of red cloth, a sash Ethan had worn during a middle school play. Marcus remembered missing that performance. A robbery case had kept him late. Another drawer held a sketchbook, filled with dark, sharp images, not of violence, but of watching, windows, keyholes, eyes drawn from odd angles, pages of shadows. On the last page, a crude drawing of Marcus at his desk. No face, just a blank head, a hole. "You were always there, and never there." Marcus sat on the bed, the weight of that emptiness sinking deep into his chest. What haunted him wasn't just the crimes. It wasn't even the bodies or the blood. It was the long, quiet failure. The moments he'd chosen the badge over the boy. The nights he'd come home too tired to ask Ethan how his day went. He thought of the parents he had comforted over the years, the promises he'd made that justice would be found. But now, he was the one left holding a photo no one else wanted to see. He reached for the chessboard again, sitting in Ethan's closet, moved a single piece forward, pawn to e4. The game had started. But now, he was playing it alone. Marcus had never been to therapy before. He'd referred hundreds of victims to it over the years, survivors, families, fellow officers, but he'd never sat in the chair himself. Until now. The room was warm, soft lighting, a worn leather couch, a glass of water on the table, untouched. Across from him sat Dr. Eileen Mercer, a quiet woman with calm eyes, maybe mid-50s, who didn't ask questions too quickly. "You don't have to talk about Ethan if you don't want to," she offered. Marcus exhaled, slow and jagged. "If I don't talk about him, I'm afraid I'll forget him. But if I do, I only remember the parts that broke everything." Aileen nodded. "Then maybe we don't start with Ethan. Maybe we start with you." That stumped him more than he expected. "I don't know who that is anymore." There was a pause. A silence that didn't hurt for once. "Then that's where we begin," she said gently. Over the following weeks, Marcus returned. Once a week, then twice. No fanfare, no timeline. He talked about Emily Warren and Rachel and Ava. He talked about the mistakes, the missed signs, the unasked questions, and eventually, he talked about the dreams, the worst ones. The one where Ethan stood at the end of a hallway holding out a chess piece. "Your move, Dad." The one where Ethan was 7 again, lost in a crowd of strangers, reaching for Marcus's hand, and Marcus always just too late to grab it. He woke from that one crying. Dr. Mercer said grief was a room with no windows. You had to learn to breathe in it anyway. He kept going. Because grief didn't kill you. Silence did. And Ethan had lived in silence for too long. By week 7, he brought in the chessboard, set it between them on the table. "He used to win without ever saying a word," Marcus whispered. Dr. Mercer studied the pieces. "Maybe now it's your turn." Spring returned to Coldwater quietly. No headlines, no sirens, just rain-washed sidewalks, blooming dogwood trees, and wind that carried memories through half-open windows. Life, as it always does, kept moving forward. But Marcus didn't. Not quite. He spent most days walking, not far, just around the edges of town, past the precinct where he'd spent decades, past the library Ethan used to hide in after school, past the empty bench near Hollow Creek where they'd once sat eating melted ice cream. Sometimes he'd sit there alone now, holding a notebook, not to write reports, just thoughts, regrets. And sometimes Ava Linley joined him. Her recovery had been slow but steady. Therapy, new routines, distance from the nightmare. She didn't look at Marcus with blame, not anymore, just understanding. A shared heaviness between survivors. "Do you think he would have stopped?" she asked him once. Marcus didn't answer at first. "No," he said finally. "I think he would have kept going, until someone made him stop." She nodded slowly. "Then I'm glad you did." He wanted to believe her. One afternoon, Claire met Marcus at the park. She had something for him, a manila envelope, unmarked. He opened it carefully. Inside was a single page, typed, clean, official. It was Ethan's final psychiatric evaluation from high school. It had never made it to Marcus's desk back then. Misfiled, buried, forgotten. Words like sociopathic tendencies, narcissistic detachment, and risk of self-isolation leapt from the page like needles. There had been signs, long ago, missed, ignored, swallowed by the noise. Marcus folded the page and slipped it back into the envelope. "Wouldn't have mattered," he muttered. "I wouldn't have read it then either." Claire didn't argue. She knew he was right. That night, Marcus stood in Ethan's room for the last time. He gathered the chess set, the journals, the sketchbook, placed them in a box, not to hide them, not to forget, but because some wounds don't need to be seen every day to still hurt. He sealed the box, labeled it with a single word, Ethan, and stored it in the attic, where it belonged. Marcus sat at the kitchen table, pen in hand. The letter in front of him had no address, no envelope. It would never be mailed, but he wrote it anyway, slowly, deliberately, like every word had weight. Ethan, you were a boy who watched too closely. I was a father who listened too little. Maybe that's where it started. Maybe it started before either of us could stop it. I should have seen you, not just in passing, not just when something went wrong. I should have seen you when you were quiet, when you were distant, when you waited. I taught people how to catch killers. I never thought I'd raise one. And I hate that sentence more than any I've ever spoken. But I don't hate you. I hate the silence between us, the 1,000 little chances I had to sit down beside you and just ask and wait and really hear you. And maybe, if I had, those girls would still be alive, and you wouldn't be buried in a box with no nameplate. You were broken. I know that now. But you didn't break alone. You were my son. You are still my son. And I'm sorry. Marcus stared at the letter for a long time. Then, without ceremony, he folded it once and tucked it into the black chessboard box. He didn't burn it, didn't shred it. He just gave it a place. He poured himself a cup of cinnamon coffee, a habit he couldn't shake, and walked out to the porch as the sun dipped beneath the trees. Across the street, kids were riding their bikes, yelling, laughing, alive. For the first time in months, Marcus closed his eyes and didn't see Ethan's face behind them. Only the boy he once was, smiling, waiting. Coldwater had a way of forgetting. The town moved on, as small towns do, slow and steady. The headlines faded. New tragedies filled the gaps. The murders became whispers, then rumors, then late-night stories told around campfires by kids who didn't know how real it had been. But Marcus remembered. He always would. Every morning, he walked to the edge of town where the old water plant had once stood. After the fire, it had been condemned, then demolished. Now, it was just a field, overgrown with weeds and windflowers, a flat stretch of land where monsters once fed. He stood there sometimes for hours, listening. Not for footsteps, not for voices, for silence. Not the numb kind that eats at you, but the kind that listens back. Ava Lindley had started writing. She was working with trauma survivors now, part of a non-profit Claire helped organize. She sent Marcus her first article draft. Its title? The Ones Who Were Almost Forgotten. He read it 3 times. Every word was sharp and clear, like she was cutting through the fog, naming the pain he couldn't. She never once mentioned Ethan by name, but she didn't have to. In town, people still nodded when they saw Marcus, out of respect or guilt or simply habit. He nodded back, but never stopped, never paused long enough to invite a conversation. Some people thought he'd gone cold, but they didn't understand. He wasn't retreating. He was listening, finally. Listening for signs, for shifts, for wounds that didn't look like wounds. He volunteered once a week now at the high school, quietly. No announcements, just helping in the counseling office, stacking files, organizing referrals, watching the hallways. Sometimes he looked a kid in the eye and asked, "You doing okay?" And when they said, "Yeah, I'm fine," but their voice cracked or their gaze broke. He sat down, and he waited. Because sometimes the right question isn't about answers. It's about staying long enough to hear the silence. Claire found him at the lake that afternoon. Marcus sat on the old wooden dock, shoes off, legs dangling over the water. The sky was pale blue, dotted with lazy clouds, and dragonflies hovered just above the reeds. It was the kind of place Ethan had once loved, before everything went dark. She sat beside him wordlessly, letting the water lap quietly beneath them. After a while, she broke the silence. They offered me a transfer to Quantico. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Big desk. Bigger headaches. She smirked. I turned it down. Why? Claire looked out across the lake. Because there's still work to do here. And because this place needs memory more than it needs medals. Marcus nodded. She handed him a folder, thinner than the others. Just a few sheets of paper inside. Ava's starting a scholarship program for survivors, victims' families. She's calling it the Linley Project. Wants your name on the advisory board. He hesitated. She doesn't have to do that. She wants to, Claire said. She says if you hadn't believed her diary, hadn't chased the trail, she wouldn't be here. Marcus looked at the papers, held them gently. I wasn't chasing justice, Claire. Not at the end. I was chasing guilt. She shrugged. Sometimes guilt leads us where nothing else can. They sat in silence for a few minutes longer. Then Claire reached into her jacket and pulled out a small velvet pouch. Found this in the evidence locker. Thought you should have it. Marcus opened it slowly. Inside was a single chess piece, a black king, charred slightly along the base, but otherwise intact. From the plant. From the last game. He turned it over in his fingers. It wasn't a trophy. It was a reminder. That power wasn't always something you took. Sometimes, it was something you gave away. He looked at Claire. Tell Ava I'll help, however I can. Claire smiled. I already did. The first session of the Linley Project began in a sunlit community center. Not a courtroom, not a police station, a room filled with couches, soft voices, and people who had survived. Marcus didn't speak at first. He sat quietly at the back, hands folded, listening. Survivors talked about their stories, not just what had been done to them, but what came after. The therapy, the fear, the shame that clung long after the bruises faded. And then one girl, barely 20, asked, what happens if the person who hurt you was someone you loved? The room fell quiet. All eyes slowly turned to Marcus. He stood slowly, not rehearsed, not polished, just real. Then you spend the rest of your life learning how to love what's left. He didn't tell them he was a cop. He didn't tell them about Coldwater or the grave or the girl who almost died in a cage. He just told them what he'd learned. That silence grows in homes where no one knocks. That pain doesn't always scream. Sometimes it waits. And that saving someone means showing up before the breaking begins. Afterward, a woman approached him. You're Ethan's father, aren't you? He froze. I read about it. My sister. She went to school with him, said he was always quiet, always polite. Marcus nodded. He was. I'm glad you're here, she said. Not because of what Ethan did, but in spite of it. That night, Marcus walked home under a sky thick with stars. He passed the precinct, the diner, the corner where he'd arrested his first suspect decades ago. And he realized something. You don't ever stop being a father. Even when your child is gone. Even when he was never the child you thought he was. You carry the weight. You carry the silence. You carry the choice to do better. Tomorrow, another meeting, another voice to hear. But tonight? He sat on the porch, coffee in hand, and whispered, "I hear you now." The final tape arrived by mail. No return address, no fingerprints. Just a plain envelope addressed to Marcus Doyle in careful handwriting he hadn't seen since Ethan was 13. He hesitated, then played it. The footage was grainy, a fixed camera, likely one Ethan had used during his rituals. But this time, no victim, no monologue, just Ethan, sitting in a chair, looking into the lens. He was maybe 24, eyes sunken, expression unreadable. "If you're watching this, I guess I'm dead." A pause. "You probably want a reason, or an apology, or something that fits into whatever neat box helps you sleep at night." Another pause. He looked away for a moment. "I don't have one. I just wanted to be seen. And I thought, if people begged me, cried for me, needed me, I'd feel real." His voice cracked just once. But it didn't work. A long silence followed. Then, "I'm sorry, Dad. Not for what I did, but for making you look back and finally see everything you missed." And with that, the screen went black. Marcus didn't cry. He simply turned off the screen, placed the tape into the fire pit outside, and let the past burn down to ash. That night, he stood in Ethan's empty room one last time, not with shame, but with understanding. He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out one final object, the black king chess piece, the one Ethan had left behind. He placed it back on the board, in checkmate. Then he closed the box and locked it. To those of you watching, thank you for walking this road with us. If you haven't yet, subscribe to The Black Ledger and let us know in the comments what state you're watching from.